Hi, and welcome to this new series titled Principles and Patterns, where we will be discussing principles and patterns in the object-oriented programming. In the first chapter, we'll discuss 5 fundamental principles known as SOLID. Each letter in SOLID represents a separate principle, and we'll start with the first letter S, which represents the single responsibility principle. The single responsibility principle says that a class should have only one reason to change. But what does it actually mean? Imagine we have a book class, which apart from having its default properties, also contains methods that implement actions such as saving book content to a file and sending notification about the book by email. The question to ask here is it book's responsibility to deal with the file system and save content of itself to a file or send notification about itself by email? Book can have methods that trigger these events, but they should not contain full implementations of the required actions for saving file and sending email, as that's not what book should be doing. We might make a change to the book's title or content, which are integral parts of the book object. But if we make a change to the way we save files or send notifications, then that's where more than one reason for a change is presenting itself. Things that aren't book's responsibility should not be implemented within the book class. Let's have a look at an example in the editor. So I have this book class with a few properties. First property called request basically contains the instance of the Illuminate request object. Then we have title and content of the book. Then we have a constructor, which is where we are instantiating this request. Then we have title, which is a getter and setter. If there is an argument, then it will associate it with the title property. Otherwise, it's going to return whatever's associated with this property. And as you can see, this getter and setter both return a string. So even though I'm setting here, usually setters don't return anything, but in this specific scenario, I just decided that I'm going to have the same return point, basically returning string in both of the cases. Here we basically associating the title, which comes through as an argument, with the property, but I'm also returning whatever that title contains. And the same goes for the content, so another getter and setter in one method. And then we have this file path, which is basically returning the path, the full path to the file which we might be saving, basically the content of the book too. And as you can see, we have this absolute argument here, which determines whether we want the relative or absolute path. Based on whether it's true or false, it's going to return the result accordingly. Then we have file URL, which is going to be sent in email. If we want to send email to someone with the link to the given file, then obviously we have the root, which is basically going to be protocol with the domain name, and then append the relative file to the relative path to the file. Then we have this method save to file. And as you can see, the implementation of actually saving the file to the disk is within this method. This is where the problem comes, because at some point we might change the way we're actually going to be saving this file, and when that happens, we're going to have to modify this book class, which really shouldn't care about how the file is saved. It should delegate this call to a given method on a given instance of the object, and that object should take care of it, not this method. We shouldn't have this file put contents here. It should be somewhere else. We should only call, for instance, file system save and just give it a file name and then whatever content we want to put into this file. And then we have this send notification method. Again, the entire implementation of how we want to send email is within this method. And if we change, let's say, package later on at some point, rather than Swift mailer, we're going to change it to something else. Guess what's going to happen? We're going to have to come back to this book class and modify this code. Again, that's completely outside of the scope of a book. Book shouldn't care about this at all. That should be in a separate class, perhaps called mail. And if there is a need for a change in the way we send emails, then we only make this change in one place, within this mail class, rather than going back to a book and reorganizing our code from within the send notification method. Send notification should only delegate to the call to the send method, for instance, on the mail class, and that's all it should do. It shouldn't care at all about how it's actually delivered. And then we have notification body and notification subject, simple methods which basically return what we want to send with our notification. Okay, so we're going to start reorganizing this code to make sure that it complies with this single responsibility principle. The first thing we're going to do is open our file browser, and within a source directory, the way I have it organized, basically, if we open composer.json, you'll see I've got this app namespace, which points to the source directory. And obviously our book class, if we scroll right to the top, is within this app book namespace. So what I'm going to start with, first of all, the first thing that already annoys me about this code is the fact that I'm actually instantiating the class here within the constructor rather than having this class injected. This is but for many reasons. One of them is the fact that later on, if I decide to create a test for this class, I won't be able to make it easy. I'm actually going to be struggling with it because I'm instantiating something within the constructor and it's outside of my ability to inject it to the class. If I was to make it a mock, for instance, I didn't want to use the real class, then I won't be able to do it. So first thing we're going to do is add this, inject this argument here, which is going to be the instance of the request, this Illuminate HTTP request, and I'm going to name it request, and rather than having instantiation here, I'm just going to assign it to our property. Let's add it to the doc block as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're going to start with this save to file method. And to change this method, we would need some sort of class which will take care of actually saving the file to the disk. And the class that I'm going to create is going to be within the source directory. We're going to create another directory here, and I'm going to call it file system. And within this file system directory, I'm going to create a class called file system as well. Actually, the same name. So file system. And then namespace is going to be app file system. And now we are saving to the disk. We could also save to a remote host and so on. So you could create an interface or an abstract class and then obviously make these subclasses to comply with whatever contract we're going to have on these. But for this simple example, I'm only going to create a simple class which will only save to the disk. Just a simple class without any interfaces, nothing like this. So we're going to start with a private property called directory. And we set it to /files. As you can see, I have this directory here within my project. So I've got files directory here, which is where I want all my files to be saved. And I'm going to give it a doc block as well. It's going to be of string type. The next thing I'm going to do is create a public function directory as well, which is going to act as a setter and getter. So if we pass the argument called directory, and if this argument is going to be null, so if is null directory, that means, not this directory, that means that I actually want to get the value associated with the property directory. So return this directory. Otherwise, I'm going to associate the value that's been passed through as an argument. So, and I'm still going to use this return statement for the setter as well. So this directory and then equals directory. So as you can see, my getter and setter both return the value. Okay, and I'm going to add some doc blocks here. By default, it's going to be null, but it also might be a string, this directory property argument here. And the message will say get set directory with slash at the beginning. And what I need to actually do here before I associate it with this property, I'm going to prepend the / to it to make sure that all this property always contains the / at the beginning. So I'm prepending the / and then trim it, so trim function on this directory argument, and make sure that from left and right hand side I trim the /. So obviously we don't have two / at the beginning and none of the slashes at the end. Okay, so this is where we have a getter and setter for our directory. The next method will give us the relative path to the directory. So public function relative path. And this one will also take an argument. This time this one is going to be called append. By default it's going to be null. And let me just scroll up a little bit. And what I'm going to do here, this append will actually allow us to put the file name and then get the path with the file name as well, if you want to. Otherwise, we only get the directory. So we first of all will check if is null append. Then what we want is simply the directory. So return this directory. And for the directory, we're not going to pass any argument here because we don't want to append anything. But otherwise, what we're going to do is return this directory, and we concatenate it with the / and then again concatenating this ltrim on the left hand side. I want to trim the / as well from this append because we might be passing so let's comma / because we might be passing something like, let's say if I do say file system relative path, we might be passing something like / books file.txt, for instance. So we want to make sure that obviously this / from the beginning of this string, which we are appending here, is removed using this ltrim on the left hand side. We want to remove / and then we obviously concatenate it anyway with the /. So now if we concatenate it with the / before these books, that's going to make sense. Okay, so that's our relative path method. Let's just add some doc blocks. Append might be null, but it might also be a string, so string. And then summary is going to say get relative path. And then the next one is going to be called absolute path, so public function absolute path. And again, we're going to take append argument here. And we're going to start with path equals real path, and we pass underscore dir for the current directory. Then we want to go out 2 levels. 2 levels because we obviously within this file system directory, so 1 level up is going to go to source, then 2 levels up is going to go to the root of our project, and then we're going to concatenate it with this directory. And now what we're going to do is to check if is null, and we're checking for this append argument. If it's null, then that's all we want, so we return path straight away. Otherwise, what we're going to do is return path and then concatenate it with the / again. And again, let's trim / from the left hand side, so ltrim, and we're gonna go for this append, and from this append remove the / from the beginning. Okay, and that's our absolute method now done as well. So let's quickly add doc blocks. Again, append might be null or string, and summary is going to say get absolute path. And then after this absolute path, the next method will be called save. So public function save, which is where the action of actually saving the file to the disk is going to be performed. First argument is going to be file name, and then content that we want to save to this file. And the last one is going to be a flag. And this flag is basically going to be passed through to this file put contents function, which will indicate, because sometimes you may want to append to contents to the file rather than replacing it. By default, it's going to replace the file if there is file already within the directory, but you may want to change it and just append to the file, basically add content at the end of the file itself. Okay, so we're going to start with the path equals this absolute path, and we go pass the file through as an argument, not files, file. And now we go for this, and the method we're going to create in just a second is going to be called prepare directory. And we pass path as an argument. Why do we do this? I'm just going to add this method quickly and I'll show you what it's going to do. So path this prepare directory will basically check whether the directory exists. And how are we going to do it? First of all, we're going to go for directory variable, and we use dir name to get directory name, path as an argument. And now we check if is directory, then we return straight away. We want this the execution of this method to terminate, and we can obviously go back to the save method and continue with whatever we've got there. But otherwise, what we want to do is make sure that we create this directory. So mk dir, and the name of the directory is this directory. And now why am I doing this? Imagine we passing to the save method a string containing not only the file name, but also the directory preceding the file name. Say for instance books and then file.txt. At this point, if we try and save it directly to the absolute path, this would go to files, then books, and obviously this books directory doesn't exist. That's why we need to first create it. If the directory exists, fine, we can save it straight there. That's why this return statement, if the directory exists, return, because we don't have to recreate directory if it exists. But otherwise, under these files, we would have to create this books directory first, which is what this line here would do. And then obviously after this, we can finally save the file to this directory. Okay, let's add some doc blocks to this prepare directory. The path will be of the string type, and create directory if does not exist. Okay, so after we've prepared the directory, we know now this directory is available. We're going to return file, put contents, and we pass the path to the file first, then content we want to put within this file, and lastly this flag to indicate whether we want to overwrite or append to the file and so on. You can check specification for this file put contents. Obviously this course isn't about this sort of functions, it's about principles and patterns. So obviously if you want to check what this function does specifically, please check PHP documentation. Okay, that's our save method done. Now let's just quickly add some doc blocks as well. File is going to be of a string type. Content is going to be mixed. It might be anything really. Flag is integer. And then what we're going to say? Well, save file. And that's our file system class completed. So now if we save it, close it, what we want to do now is if we scroll up within our book class, now our book class can take another dependency, so we can inject this file system when we actually instantiate in this book class. So after the request, I'm going to put these arguments on new lines here. Let's add this second one as file system, up file system, and let's call it file system. And let's update doc blocks as well, and let's initialize fields, which is basically going to add a new property here called file system. I'm going to move it right after request, and it's obviously representing this file system class which we've just created, and this is where we associating the argument, basically inject here with this property file system. So now we have this file system available. What we can do now is go back to our save to file, and rather than actually doing all the logic behind how we actually save in this file, is simply return and now make call to this file system to the method save and pass it two arguments. First one is going to be called file name, the other file content. Let's check what we've got here currently in place. We don't have file name, so let's quickly create this method before this file path. New public function file name, and this one will return books. This is the directory I want to save the file to. Then concatenate it with string replace, and I'm going to replace any spaces with hyphens within this book title, and then concatenate it with the extension .txt. Now, obviously, in a real project, I probably would use a little bit more robust approach than just checking for spaces. There might be apostrophes as well in the title, which I should also remove and so on. But let's just keep it simple for this simple example. Okay, let's add the doc block to this method as well. We're going to add get file name. Now, if we scroll down, we can completely remove this file path now, because we don't have to worry about file path. We already told this class which directory we want to store these files within, which is basically within the file name. And then we have file URL. Now file path is gone, so how are we going to make it? Obviously request root is still going to give us the protocol with the domain name, but we need to make sure that we have a proper path to the file basically that we want someone to be able to access when we send them a link by email. Okay, so this time we're going to use the file system again and call the method relative path on it. We pass this file name through as an argument to append to this directory, because the relative path is going to return path to this files directory, which is going to be /files, and then whatever we have within this file name, which is going to be books, and then the name of the file itself. So this is the file URL. And the next thing, so let's just actually, before we do anything else, let's just pass this first argument here, which is going to be the file name to this save method, and the next argument will be the content that we actually want to put within this file. Let's straight away make a call to file content method. We don't have this method yet, so let's create it right before the save to file. So public function file content, because we might want to access content of this book as well outside of this class, so let's keep it public obviously here. If you don't want to allow this, then obviously change the visibility, entirely up to you. So from within this method, we're going to return implode function. We are going to implode an array of title and content with the constant PHP EOL, which represent the new line character on a given operating system. And then the array is going to contain this title, and the second item is going to be this content. So let's now add some doc blocks here as well quickly as return string, and we're going to say get file alg book content. Okay, and that's our refactoring of this save to file method completed. So now this is not our responsibility to perform save of the file content into the file. It's a responsibility of this file system class. We only delegating the call to this save method, but whatever this method does is not our concern at all. So book doesn't care what this method does. It knows that it needs to pass file name and the content we want to save to the file, but all the logic behind saving the file itself is responsibility of this file system class. Okay, let's open our index.php and let's see what we actually can do. Within the index.php, I only have autoloader included, and then this .env, which basically registers these four variables, environment variables, which come from the .env file. I'm going to upload this together with the exercise files, so you'll have access to all of these. You won't have this .env, you will have this .env.example, so you can actually basically duplicate this file and obviously update all the credentials here for your SMTP accordingly. I'm going to be using Mailchop later on, so you'll see how it works as well. But just to test what we've just done, let's just instantiate the book. So book equals new book, and obviously this book class requires two arguments. First one was the instance of the request, so I'm going to use request and then capture method, which will return itself after parsing the URL. And then we're going to have new file system, which we've just created, and it's this app file system. And there we go. That's all we need to pass to this book, obviously semicolon at the end. And let's import all these classes as well. So import, then request, import as well, and file system. So we've got them all right here at the top. And now what I want to do on this book instance is to set the title. So book title, I want to set to say room with a view, and then book content, I want to say something like book content goes here, for instance. And then what I want to do is use a book and call method save to file on it. Okay, and that's all I want to do. So let's see what's going to happen when we open this index.php file within the browser. Now I've got my project open here on the right hand side. I didn't load this page yet. As you can see on the left hand side, we only have this files directory, but if I now hit return within the bar, nothing shows on the page, obviously, because we don't provide any output to the browser. But if I go back to my editor, you can see this has created this books directory, and within this books directory we have this room with a view, which is basically the name of the file is basically all these spaces that we have are replaced with the hyphen. And inside of the file, there we go, title, and on a new line we have content that we pass through to this save method on the file system. This save to file method works pretty much the same way as before we did this refactoring, but the main difference here is that now we don't have the implementation here, because now we're calling this save method on the file system, and file system behind the scenes does what it needs to be done in order to save this content into this file. And now if at any point we change the way that we save files on the file system, then all you need to do is go to the file system class and change the logic there. You don't have to go file by file and change all this functionality that you might have within these files, which has nothing to do with the class they are within. It's just adding some additional functionality, which really isn't a concern of the class itself. So this is how we've refactored the save to file method to remove this responsibility which was lying within this book class and move it to the separate class. In the next video, we're going to have a look at how we can do the same with the send notification method.